Welcome back to the BHAW Army Wrestling Radio Show. I'm your host, Jordan Tom, followed with Brian Rowan. We got a 2000 graduate. He was a team captain, Mr. Intensity Award recipient, Mike Natvick Award recipient, the Wally Crum recipient, and he finished in the EIW 5th, 6th, 3rd, and 3rd. And Bureau's got a little bit of a clown comment in here saying he might be the most credentialed wrestler to never qualify for the NCAAs. But I'm excited to have on here Troy Yegge. Hey, Troy, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good. Glad to have you on the show. It's we're trying to get a few of the. It's weird saying older guys because I feel like you're not that old, but a lot of our listeners are in the like 20-15 year group and present, and to them I feel like you're an old buck. I'm an old buck. Even Jordan is an old buck.
I'm more like a spike.
We're getting there, but not that old yet. I know a lot of older people than us, right?
Yeah. It's actually interesting for listeners. Troy and I met at a preseason tournament in North Carolina. He lives in South Carolina. I live in North Carolina. We're coaching rival teams. And it wasn't at that tournament, but a couple tournaments later in that same season, we were coaching against each other. I think it was like 10 matches into a Virginia Beach tournament where it was like just match after match. And if you've been to some of the bigger tournaments, you're wrestling one match and then 15 minutes later you're wrestling the next one when you're getting to, towards the end of it. And I think as coaches, it was interesting. A little heated at times.
That's our personalities. Yeah.
Once a wrestler, always a wrestler.
That's right.
So let's dive on in. So, tell us a little bit about, growing up in Iowa, how you ended up at Blair, and kind of, what brought you to West Point.
Sure. So, Iowa, I guess, not surprisingly, not most of us, but a lot of us wrestle. Not the biggest population, but we still have our fair share of pretty good wrestlers. And I wrestled from kindergarten, essentially when I could walk, because I guess it was a family tradition at that point. And then I wrestled all the way through high school. Pretty good high school overall. We were state champs my senior year. We ended up being ranked, I guess, because how they typically used to do it, they'd rank your team the next year. So we were ranked 10th in the country coming out of that. So I was really lucky. Had a really good coach, won a few state titles along the way. From there, when I was a senior, actually, West Point started reaching out to me and recruiting me. It's not something I had really thought about that much at that point. But the more I looked into it, I thought it was you get a pretty good education, get to serve the country a little bit as well. And I was going to get to wrestle. Along the way, they asked me if I could go to Blair instead. Became a little bit more where they wanted me to go, and I think it got a little bit more solidified my senior year when I went out to high school nationals. I did pretty well there. I ended up placing, which I was probably the only guy who wasn't a state champion that actually placed at that thing at that point, because you had to get first or second in your state just to even show up there a long time ago, back in the day when it was at Pittsburgh. And I know it was between me and another kid that they were looking at, and then I did pretty well there. So they decided that they would want me to go, and I need to work on my scores a little bit to get into the academy. I was one of those borderline guys. So I went to Blair. Blair was awesome opportunity. I actually kind of got to almost like major in wrestling that year, where I was taking a lot of the same classes I had taken the year before, just trying to do a little bit better and get a little bit better score on the SAT. But Blair was an awesome experience. The room was awesome. It was essentially a college room even at that point a few years back. They're probably not as good as they are nowadays, but my year was the first year they won that mythical national title, I guess. I don't know how they determined it. But I think national preps that year, I was too old to actually wrestle on it, so I wasn't allowed. I was too old. I was too old by 3 days, I think. But we had 14 guys that were there, still 14 weights at that point, and I think we had 14 guys in the finals, if I remember right, and I think we won 10 or 11 of those of the national preps at that point. So it was a pretty good team. I think overall, I think we were 17 Division I wrestlers out of my graduating class. Because we had the college team at that point. That's not such a big deal now, but when I was there, we'd go against like JVs at Penn State and Lehigh and some of the junior colleges as well, with a lot of the post grads there. So that's kind of how it kind of went. And then from there, once I decided I was going to go there, West Point helped me pay for that. So that's when I knew I was going to go to West Point after that. I went there mainly because I knew it was a great education. I didn't know a heck of a lot about it growing up in Iowa. When I visited there, I was there after recognition. And they kind of fooled me a little bit, saying, it's just like a normal school. You just wear a uniform. I was like, that's cool. So, yeah, it was a little bit different experience, I guess, when you're a plebe. But beyond that.
So when you're going to, like, I feel like going to Blair is kind of like going to the preps, going to the use maps in some senses where, from a wrestling perspective. But how often do you get to visit West Point when you're at Blair? Are you communicating with the coaches? Like, how is that relationship when you're doing your post-grad year at Blair, like with the hopes of going to West Point? How's that work?
So there wasn't a ton. We went there, I think I visited there twice, and they came down and talked to me a couple of times too, because it wasn't that far apart. But when I was growing up, or when I was going to Blair, they had gotten rid of the program at USMAP. So that's why there was no wrestling program at USMAP for a few years. So they were using more I was there was another guy with me that was going through Blair at that same time, and there was someone going through Walsh Jesuit at the same time. So there was 3 of us going through the prep program at that point. But mostly I just went up, and as a post grad, they had me wrestle against some of the JV guys, I guess, and I did pretty well. They knew I was coming up there, and I stuck the JV guy, so they gave that guy a lot of heartache, saying this high schooler came up there and pinned you. So I got to enjoy that a little bit as well, but I don't think I even visited and spent the night when I was at Blair, because I had done that when I was a senior in high school, so there wasn't a ton of interaction.
Awesome. Yeah, I was interested, with David Farr as a guest, being a Blair guy and knowing how good the Blair teams are now. Like, I was following Blair right around that time frame, and I remember them being just as good back then. I remember going to the Beast of the East when I was, a freshman in high school in probably 2000, so not too far after when you were there, and they were really good.
No, I mean, make no mistake, we were really good too, but I think these guys are even another level now. I guess right after I graduated, I think they went even to another level. You had people like Zach Esposito and Mako and Cooperman, and you had the 97-pounder that went to Iowa State that was like a 4-time All-American, I think a couple-time finalist, all on that same.
Backus, I think, was there too.
There you go. That's who I was trying to think of. So those guys showed up a couple years, I think, after I graduated, and pretty amazing group of guys, right, to come out of one high school.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Nothing like having 2 or 3 national champs on the same team.
Well, they don't send too many people off to Blair anymore. It's mostly use maps. They're in a lot better position now, definitely, to send the guys there. But it still is an option, because they presented that to me, and I was just not willing to give up an extra year for a multitude of reasons. So good on you. But maybe talk about how the recruiting landscape changed. Was there any point when you were at Blair where you were thinking about going somewhere else because maybe you had exposure to some other coaches, or what was that like?
Yeah, I started to get noticed a little bit more. I think I also got noticed, like I talked about, because of how I did at high school nationals as well. But I visited a couple other schools just to see. So Brown was recruiting me a little bit. Navy tried to recruit me a little bit too. I was like, no, thank you. And a few of the other Ivy Leagues as well. But I was kind of an unknown, I think, because it's a different world than recruiting back then, right? You either were state champ, things like that. Well, I never won state. I got second, was third a couple times, but fell just short. But once you're kind of there at Blair, they're all in the room enough, right? Enough college coaches seem to be showing up there. So, and I was doing pretty well in the room. I could hold my own with pretty much almost anyone in the room at that point as well. Yeah,
I asked because I feel like the term diamond in the rough was probably like way more true back then than it is now. There's no flow. Yeah. There's no really major media content about wrestling. It's literally box scores. It's like, okay, this guy's a state champ, this guy's a state placer, and that's who probably the coaches are going after. Yep. And other than that, unless you just happen to find yourself in a room, the coaches there maybe looking at a different kid, all of a sudden you have exposure like, wow, that kid's really good too, I'm going to go after him. So Definitely has changed. My gosh.
Now there's no
There weren't as many
diamond in the rough
tournaments
really at the end of
either.
the day. Yeah.
Now there's so many national level tournaments. There's 4 or 5 different tournaments for middle school and high school kids to go to. And back then it was
just senior nationals.
Fargo.
Yeah.
Some freestyle, some other freestyle stuff, in the spring, and then in the fall you didn't really have anything national.
Yeah, and I didn't even really do much.
East Ironman, if your school went to it.
Yeah, we didn't do much in the summer. Once I hit high school, I worked, so there wasn't a lot of Fargo type things, and I know it was big in the area, but I just didn't do it for whatever reason. I wrestled freestyle kind of all the way up till I was a freshman, and then I kind of stopped after that. I don't even really know why. I think it's because I wanted to work and go after girls probably at the end of the day.
No shame.
So transitioning to your time at West Point. So when we talked to Maurice Worthy on one of the first episodes, he talked about some of the coaching transition and the craziness of it. And I think that's where I first learned talking to you when you came to that clinic we had at my club, about how crazy it was and the gap between coaches. And I think you mentioned that you were filling in as like the coach during a portion of the summer or the fall leading into the season. Can you talk about like what that was like, the transition between the coaches?
Yeah. So I was serving as the grad assistant, or I think they still have grad assistants probably, but showed up there in June or July to help out with the camp that they have. And right after the camp, Giles told me, "Hey, I'm resigning." And I was like, "Ooh, interesting." So he had just fired the other assistant coach in the spring too. So when he resigned, I was the only person left in the program for what would that have been? Probably July or August is when he did it, and then until we got Chuck Barbie in, which is when I think he showed up in like October or November. It took a little while for them to do the hiring. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I got to serve as the head coach. I got to bring the plebes in and kind of hang out with them for a little while, right? When they're over there during the B summer, give them that little break as well. I got to interview a lot of good guys for the coaching position. Barbie was one of them. I think TJ Jaworski is the other one I remember that interviewed at that same time frame as well. And then I had to come up with a practice plan for the first 2 months, right? While we were trying to hire a coach. So I worked with Maurice a little bit as him and Matt Ross were the two captains coming back, and said, "Hey, I know you all think I'm your peer, but right now you got to listen to what I say a little bit as well." And they did a good job. All the kids did. And once Barbie got in there, it was kind of a breath of fresh air, in my opinion, where we were getting a little bit more solid technique. And I wish I would have had him as my coach, I guess, for a couple of years. And I learned a lot from him that those few months that I was there. I got to be the coach for almost 10 months because they wanted a little continuity throughout that year.
Wow.
It was fun.
Wow.
Yeah, that would be fun, but it's super interesting. I mean, like 1 minute you're graduating, they're your teammates, and then the next minute there's no head coach and you're the guy that they're looking to.
Yeah, that, and I sent out, I had to try to figure out how to start recruiting because I know how I was recruited back then. And so you had to do it all via mail. So I picked up the USA Wrestling, figured out whoever they had as the top ranked kids, and I sent a letter to every single one of them just to try to start the recruiting process as well. It was fun.
So that would have been what? That was 2001?
That was 2000, summer
Fall
2000.
of 2000? Or
That's right.
2000. So that would be the incoming class of 2005. We need to go back and see who you recruited.
I don't know how many I would have actually gotten to be the solid recruiter, but I know Simpson was one of the ones that came in that year, but I don't think I can take credit for that. I think
take the credit.
I think Barbie would take the credit for him coming in as well. And Ward, we tried to get recruit Ward too. I remember both of them coming on the same weekend to visit as well.
Do you remember anything about that weekend?
No. I remember that they were young. That's about it.
What else was in, like, do you remember about the transition when Coach Barbie came in, other than the fact that it took the pressure off of you to be making all the decisions as a fresh breath air?
Well, I think he brought in some different techniques. So he was big in leg riding, things like that. That was one of the bigger things. I remember him coming in and teaching us and how to grind a little bit more on top, where in the past we weren't great on top. We would mostly wrestle on our feet, I think. So he brought some of that mentality into us and helped us be a little bit better on top.
Yeah, he definitely had some top technique. I remember him showing me some stuff when I got up there. It was good. Some good stuff.
He was getting good on the boots, and I remember him also bringing in another Oklahoma State guy too that was there for a year when we were there. Todd Chesbro came in for a year or two. He stopped being a lawyer for a couple of years and wanted to be a wrestling coach. That was what he had grown up with his whole life. His dad, I think, was a famous coach down in Oklahoma as well, helping out at Oklahoma State. So
that's cool.
He brought in some good people too.
So another interesting thing that happened like during that time period was the whole, I guess it was more really a couple years prior during your career, was the weight cutting incident. Obviously not good publicity for the wrestling community at the time. And those guys unfortunately lost their life due to that stuff. But maybe talk through some of the things that happened after that. I know you got like a story about how like the weights changed and all that. Just get into that.
Yeah, so that was my sophomore year. One of the guys actually died that was supposed to come to our tournament at West Point with the Black Knight Open. He passed away, I think it was the day or two before, as he was trying to lose weight. I think he was the third or fourth one of that year. So a lot of what changed was over the Christmas break. That's when it all hit. And I was actually dropping from 58 down to 150 that way because me and Maurice were two of the better wrestlers, and we wanted to make sure both of us were in the lineup. And Maurice was he was better than me. I just was able to beat him in our wrestle off because he was a dumb freshman that made a dumb mistake. That was it. He was a better wrestler than me though. But I was trying to get down to 150 at Midlands. And it was a tough cut dropping. Obviously, it was another 8 pounds after I was already pretty sucked out. And so at Midlands, I'm trying to make the weight, and I'm probably 2 or 3 pounds over. I'm running, getting in the sauna, everything. I think I got to about a half a pound over, and the coach showed up. He goes, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to get down to 150." He goes, "It's 157." I said, "What are you talking about?"
Oh my God, I would have killed him.
And he's like, "I told you." I said, "You sure as hell didn't tell me, because there's no way I would still be running, right?" So yeah, that was a little frustrating, but it was a big change for us, right? We went from weighing in the day before to weighing in the hour before. They cut out saunas, that was one of my main ways of making weight. I would actually ride when it was the day before, I'd be about 8 or 9 pounds over, and I'd ride a bike in the sauna until I made weight. That was my practice. I just try to get that last little bit of water out for about 2 hours and then put it right back in. But had to change things a little bit where they didn't let you get in the sauna. I know I got suspended once for trying to use the sauna once. So they monitored that pretty well there at school. So it was just a culture shock, right? Where you had to change, going back almost to what you were doing in high school a little bit, where you had to weigh in. I think instead of, it used to be the morning of, now it was an hour beforehand. So you had to get a little bit smarter with your weight. I never really did. I wish I would have, but it was something that the people that were smarter with weight cutting, I think, did a lot better dealing with it.
Jeez.
So to lighten things up a little bit, tell us a funny story about one of your teammates.
Sure.
What do you got?
Let's see. I struggled on this one a little bit, but it's a funny and scary at the same time, I think. But me as a wrestler, I thought it was funny at the time. So it was my freshman year, coming back from Christmas break. We came back early to go wrestle North Carolina and UPenn down at UPenn. And I remember getting off the plane, checking my weight. I'm like, oh, only 15 over with 24 hours to make weight. Awesome. Well, luckily it wasn't just me. That was pretty much our whole team was there. So we were all hanging out in the sauna, because that's what we used to do back then. And Jarrett Matthews, I remember him getting so sucked out one time when you heard about like a dead cockroach. That was actually him. We couldn't physically move his arms or his legs. He got so dehydrated trying to lose that much weight at one time. And So they had to take him to the hospital, and I think what he ended up having to have is like 10 or 12 IVs just to get his body back to loosen up.
Gosh.
Kind of scary, but at the time we thought it was funny.
It sounds like he didn't make weight.
He did not travel with us, no.
Gee whiz.
I think it did cost us against North Carolina, I think. That was back when UPenn was really good. UPenn was kind of like Cornell is now within the Easterns, but we I think would have beat North Carolina if Jarrett would have been with us.
Mm.
So if speaking about talking about teammates and guys around your area, if you could have, if there's one person you'd like to hear on the show from around your area, or a couple people, who would you want to hear from?
I think Brad Fensky would be my first choice. So he was, I think, he was a senior when I was a freshman coming in. So he was the guy that was having a ton of success. I think he had our wins record for a number of years for the program and qualified 2 or 3 times. And I think he did 20 years in the Army, so he'd have a lot of good stories probably there as well. He served as a GA for a year. And Jared Matthews would probably be another good one. Those guys are both 2 of the studs that won over 100 matches, I think, for the program. And they're good dudes.
Well, do Jared on to confirm his cockroach story.
You can. I'm sure he'll remember it.
Probably very vivid.
May
yes.
not.
He might have blocked it out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
So we touched on it briefly in the beginning. Jordan was talking about. I was joking about it as I was looking up your bio. I was seeing, you come out of high school and you talked about not being, that highly recruited or you weren't a state champion coming out and having pretty much pretty good success out of the bat. Placing the IWAs as a freshman is a big accomplishment. Going 5th, 6th, 3rd. That's got to be a lot to a lot to go through and process. When you're finishing your career. So I really wanted to what was the IWAs like back then? Has it changed? Has it developed? What's from a tournament perspective and a league perspective?
So right before I got there, I think Easterns had a little bit of a downturn. So that's why there was so few qualifiers, I guess, for a little while. Mm-hmm. And then when I got there is when Penn was on its way up. Cornell was on its way up. There was a lot of teams. Lehigh was obviously still Lehigh. That's when we were starting to try to challenge maybe the ACC and the Pac-12 for being the 3rd best conference after the Big 10 and Big 12s. And there were some tough teams there. Just the problem was, you asked why I never qualified. It's because we only had like 26 guys that were allowed to qualify for a little while there.
Wasn't the allocations, and correct me if I'm wrong, for some reason I think, wasn't it based on the year prior's placements?
Years prior to the round of 12, how many got there, but there were certain teams that would cap out, and I don't remember exactly.
Which
but
is such a dumb system. That makes no sense.
It was stupid because you're limited, because if you only had 2 guys in a weight class that went to nationals the year before, how are you going to be able to send 3 the next year?
Yeah.
Because those guys would have to perform. And
it wasn't even by your weight class. It was the total Eastern. So it didn't matter if you had a really good weight class or not. The way the Easterns did it is they took, I believe it was the top 2, and then they vote in for the last 6 that how they would get in there. And a lot of the times the Ivy League probably would get tight, and sometimes those guys would vote together. It's what you would call the Ivy. I don't know what they call them, like the Ivy Mafia, whatever they call those guys would all seem to get the nods over
secret handshake stuff. Yeah,
things like that. So it was tough, but the Easterns was definitely on its way up in the late 90s. You saw tons of good guys starting to come through there with like Brett Mattner, who's a national champion, and his brother was I think a national champion or a runner-up in the late 90s right before him, and you had lots of good kids from Penn. I can speak my weight a little bit better. My junior year, there was 5 of us, I think, ranked in the top 20 going into the Easterns. I got 3rd. I was behind 2 All-Americans, the kid that got 3rd and I think 5th. Kalar was one of the guys from Harvard, pretty tough guy, 2 or 3-time All-American, and Travis Dodo, who I think was a 2-time All-American. I was just a little bit behind those guys. They beat me by 1 or 2 points. And that was just the way it worked. And even though there was 5 of us in the top 20, they only took 2 from our weight. That's just how it worked out. Which kind of sucks because I I beat some All-Americans. I beat some runners-up even in the nationals, but I never got my chance. But that was just the system back then. I'm happy that it's changed to the way it is now, because how you actually compete and how you have your season, it matters now, right? You want to make sure you're getting enough allocations for your conference, and it gives you a better shot to get into. I think it makes a lot more sense.
Well, not to like, rip open old wounds, but like, does it still not sit well with you?
I mean, there's a little bitterness, I guess. I would have liked to have had the chance, right? But and I think I was a guy who was like a fringe. I had a shot if I had a good weekend to be an All-American. I wasn't going to be the national champ or anything like that, but I had a chance maybe to slip in there if things worked out well for me. And I would have liked to have had that opportunity. But I never did.
Hey, there's always Midlands this year.
I wrestled in Midlands a couple times. I was a blood round guy back then. I got to wrestle Ernest Benyon there. I don't know if you guys know him or not, but he made me feel silly when I was a freshman. He was a national champion and runner-up a couple times at Joe Williams. It was fun. That was back when Midlands was a little bit tougher than it is nowadays, because all the old guys would wrestle like us.
So I guess you would say the Midland has.
Midland has definitely
Well,
fought.
I mean, there was no Southern Scuffle back then. There was no South Beach duels. So, everybody went to the Midlands. And then you also had – there's a lot of post-grads and a lot of, out-of-college guys that were competing.
Yeah, Joe Williams was going there every year back when I was competing still. And, he's a world champ. So guys like that were still competing in there. And even guys that were on the Olympic ladder would come and compete too. As well, that you may not have known, and I didn't know who they were, but I sure figured it out after I got to wrestle them. they make me feel a little bit like the old men know what they're doing.
Jeez. Well, another thing that's really unique about your story and your journey through West Point, Troy, is obviously it occurred during the time of 9/11, so you were there pre 9/11. And then you probably were at Bullock when it happened. Is that right?
We didn't have that when I was when I did it. I was just getting out of basic essentially, and on my way to my first duty station when 9/11 happened. So because I was a grad assistant for so long. Yeah. So got out of officer basic course. Was going to pick up my wife from her family back in Iowa, because I was married at that point too, and then we were getting ready to drive up to Alaska. So.
Oh wow.
It happened while I was on the road from Georgia up to Iowa at that point when I heard it was happening.
Do you remember kind of your thoughts at the time? All right, I'm a brand new lieutenant and I'm about to sign into my unit and this is going on. What you were thinking at the time?
I figured I'm ready to go. I think I'm going to war is kind of how I was thinking about it. Was it a little nerve-wracking at that point? Yes. Obviously, we were changing and transition from really a peacetime Army for the most part to, you guys probably know this too. It was still at a high tempo, probably even when you guys were in at that point too. So I didn't go right away. They put me through. I think I was up in Alaska for almost 5 years before I finally left. So we went through a stabilization. We were a test unit for the Stryker unit up there, and they wanted everyone to be there 3 years in a solid area. So we were probably the most cohesive unit in a while. So went over to Iraq after that, and we were one of the first 16-month units as well. So we were part of that surge going from Mosul down to Baghdad. But it was definitely a change. You kind of went from when I was originally signed for Alaska, what I heard about it, it was a fishing club, a hunting fishing club, and that was not how it was when I got up there. I mean, I got to enjoy some fishing, but it was a lot of training, getting ourselves ready to go.
I can just imagine. I mean, when I deployed a couple times, I was at Fort Campbell, and we were just dealing with the summers being different in Afghanistan and Iraq versus Fort Campbell. I can just imagine going from Alaska and the change. If you went in the winter, going from there right to Iraq, that would be. Yeah.
It was
crazy.
A little different. It was a little different, yeah. It is warmer in Alaska in the summer than what people think, but it was still not terribly warm. It's about 80 degrees when we left. because we left in August. So it was a little warm over in Kuwait when we landed. I remember looking at the thermometers and it was like 135 because the solar heat bouncing off of there. And you're like, I didn't even know it could get that hot.
Melt your face off.
Yes. And I remember hearing about some of the units before us, like the guys falling down like instantly walking off the plane because they weren't hydrated enough. So they made us drink tons of water on our way over there, obviously. But it was a little shell shock. I was surprised they sent the unit from Alaska to Iraq instead of Afghanistan, obviously with some of the same temperature, but they wanted our strikers over there. That was what the main thing they were looking for.
But you were ready for it with all your Aerodyne sprints and Asana training.
It really didn't bother me that much, except for having all the
you were
weight
good to
on.
go.
No Aerodyne. I would use just the normal old school Schwinn's because you didn't want the air moving around in there.
Sure, rookie mistake. Why would I think that? That's some good expertise right there. So you served up in Alaska. Maybe just give everybody a short brief on what you did, during your time in the Army, and then what you're up to now.
Sure. Like I talked about, I was 10 months back at West Point as the coach there, and then went down to Fort Sill to learn my craft, right? Do OBC down there. Lovely area, Fort Sill is. Highly recommend it. Actually, I had a good time there. And then went up to Alaska for almost six years. So that's where I spent the bulk of my military career. I got stop lost up there for a couple of years, just because they kept pushing our deployment back, and spent 16 months over in Iraq. So I was there from August of 05 through November of 06, and then got out shortly thereafter, just because I had two children, and what the Army was kind of offering me at the time didn't sound all that appealing. They wanted me to go down to OBC and come back 6 months later and back to Alaska, which I did like it there, and leave for another year. And I was like, well, I kind of want to raise my kids. So that's kind of why I made the call to get out. I actually really enjoyed my time in. And then today, I am a food marketer, where I focus on the innovation side. So are you guys getting this at all?
It's breaking up just for a brief second.
But my job, I work for Campbell Soup Company, it's called. But we focus more on the snacks, which a lot of people don't know that they have a large snack segment. And my job is to come up with new potato chips. So I come up with new flavors, forms, and that is really a job. So
right on.
Friday I get to taste about 7 or 8 new bags that the R&D folks sent to me. So that's why I have a big old belly now.
Yeah, I was wondering because you coach. You're pretty involved in coaching. So I guess last question, we kind of wrap things up. It's kind of like when you before the show we talked about you were just coming back from a tournament in Myrtle Beach last week. We had some athletes competing. When your kids are interested in West Point, how do you talk them through what it's like at West Point, or how do you have that little recruiting pitch, if you may, or tailor the conversation to tell them about it?
Yeah, I talked to one of the kids is going up there this year from South Carolina that I helped connect. Walker Stevenson, pretty tough kid. But I talked to him a lot about the education. I mean, to me, that's the biggest deal, why you want to go there. And also because you as an 18-year-old kid, you want to serve, I think, hopefully, but that's not the main point. You as an 18-year-old kid, that's something that'll either you'll want to continue to do, but at a minimum, it's a great job to have right out of the Army. The other big thing I talked to them about is if you're a good enough wrestler, you have a chance to go compete for the rest of your career if you choose to. Like I talk about Anderson, I think he still competes even to this day. You have a chance to go do the WCAP, and how many people can get a $50,000, $60,000 a year job just wrestling? There's not a lot of them, if that's something you want to do. But the main thing I talk about is the leadership you'll learn and the education you're going to get, because I think that's the biggest selling point, I think, for West Point. And I talk a little bit about how the program's come a long ways, even from, I think it's at the top right now of where we've been as a program right now. I think Kevin Ward's been doing an awesome job, and I kind of say, here, look at what this team's doing. They're really right on the fringe of being a top 15 team. So those are like some of the things I cover with the kids.
Yeah, you pretty much covered it. We were talking with Ned Shack a couple of weeks ago. A lot of it was recruiting, and a lot of stuff you just talked about. He hit on a lot. It's interesting to hear from a a parent perspective, a youth high school coach perspective, and how it's so similar, especially from as an alumni, to what the coaching staff is preaching. So it's good to see that there's a lot of consistencies there.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a couple good kids in our program right now. I'm hoping that are looking at it as well. Smart kids that I think could help the program too, and I think it'd be good for them. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll see them in the black and gold here in not too long.
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
Fingers crossed.
Well, you got anything else you want to tell the Army Wrestling Network?
If you guys come down to Charlotte, hit me up. I'm always willing to get together with everybody, and hopefully we'll continue to beat Navy even with Kolak coming in there. I've been excited to watch us beat them for the last few years, because I know my freshman year was the first time we beat them in like 35 years. I don't ever want to see that drought again. So
Kolat, Schmolat, we'll be fine.
Yeah. I burned my Kolak shoes. So. They're worth nothing anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, guys, I appreciate you having me. It was fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you.
Thanks for tuning in to the BHAW Radio Show. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. If there's something you'd like to hear on a future show, reach out to us on any of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can reach us at email, bhaw.radio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, go Army, be Navy.